Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Pat Higgins. I'm the president and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and it's really a joy to welcome you to tonight's program, Securing and Safeguarding Transgender Rights, which is presented in conjunction with our current special exhibition, Rise Up, Stonewall, and the LGBTQ rights movement. We are honored to co-present tonight's program with our wonderful partners at Resource Center Dallas, an incredible organization that pursues societal equity by proudly offering LGBTQIA+ affirming resources designed to improve health and wellness, strengthen families and communities, and provide transformative education and advocacy. I'd like to start by extending a special thank you to the sponsors of the Rise Up exhibit. Rise Up is presented by Texas Instruments Foundation. The exhibition is supported by Match Group, and the anchor sponsor is Dallas Tourism Public Improvement District. Our exhibition sponsors are Fossil Group and Toyota, and our airline sponsor is American Airlines. Please join me in thanking our sponsors for making tonight and our exhibition possible. We're so grateful for their support. I would also like to thank our amazing exhibition community partners, Abounding Prosperity, Beth-El Binah, Cathedral of Hope, Dallas LGBTQ Bar Association, the Dallas Way, Equality Texas, North Texas LGBT Chamber of Commerce, Resource Center, Texas Latino Pride, and the UTD Gallerstein Gender Center. What an incredible group of sponsors and community partners. Thank you all so much for your support. Thank you for being here. We could not fulfill our mission without our generous supporters and our community partners, so thank you so much. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to Museum and Resource Center board members, members of both organizations, staff, and volunteers that are with us tonight. We appreciate your support of tonight's program and our partnership. If you would like to engage further with either of our organizations, please visit our websites. The museum is dhhrm.org, and the Resource Center is myresourcecenter.org. We need volunteers and supporters, and we would love to get you engaged. Before I introduce tonight's panel, I would like to welcome Leah Templeton, Diversity and Inclusion Business Partner at Texas Instruments, to share a few words on behalf of our presenting sponsor. Leah, thank you so much for your leadership in the community and your unwavering support at the museum.
Thank you, Mary Pat. So Texas Instruments is proud to be presenting sponsor of the Rise Up exhibition and to support important programs like tonight's session on securing and safeguarding transgender rights. At TI, we value inclusion and equality for everyone and strongly support the LGBTQIA+ community. We are committed to providing a welcoming place for all people and continue to be recognized as a top place to work for LGBTQ equality. Our TI Pride Network, one of our incredible employee resource groups, focuses on creating an environment of respect at TI so that people of all sexual orientations and gender identities can be their true selves at work. We are hopeful that through this partnership with the museum and the Rise Up exhibition, that it helps educate about the targeted discrimination against the LGBTQIA+ community and inspires individuals to stand up against it and encourages everyone to be a part of the work to create a healthy, inclusive society for all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leah. I'm so proud of TI for all of your work to be an inclusive employer. If we ever needed this panel, I think now is the time. And, right? Somewhat of a misnomer saying securing transgender rights, because I think we'll learn from our panel tonight that there are very few rights that are constitutionally enjoyed, right? But Not enough from me. We're going to learn from our incredible panel, all of whom are on the forefront of the fight for transgender rights in Texas and beyond. Carter Brown. Carter, wave your hand. Carter Brown is the co-founder and executive director of National Black Trans Advocacy Coalition, the first national Black trans-led nonprofit organization. With over a decade of extensive experience in engaging transgender communities, Brown's prominent leadership of the organization has established BTAC's community organizing and programming to be indispensable in the movement towards equality. Trayshawn Pate. Trayshawn is the program manager for Transgender Education Network of Texas, where he develops intentional and impactful community engagement projects and initiatives, and is an advocate who works to create equitable policies and legislation in the state of Texas. What a difficult job. He has an extensive background in policy covering several areas, including voting rights, LGBTQ rights, and reproductive health. His ultimate desire is to create a truly equitable Texas and nation. And have a clap for that. Diamond Stiles is a is a long-standing voice of the millennial Black trans community. She is the executive director of Black Trans Women, Inc., a national nonprofit led by Black trans women focusing on social advocacy, positive visibility, and building strong leadership among Black trans advocates, activists, and allies. She is also the host and producer of the award-winning podcast Marsha's Plate, a weekly exploration of politics and pop culture from a trans pro-Black feminist lens. And last but not least, Leslie McMurray. Leslie is a transgender education and advocacy associate for Resource Center in Dallas. She spent 33 years in the radio and television business before transitioning and summarily being fired. Correct. Over the past decade, Leslie has conducted scores of trainings for a variety of entities, including the museum, and we're so grateful for that, Leslie. She's a contributing columnist for the Dallas Voice and a frequent resource for Dallas television and radio stations on issues relating to the transgender community. So we're going to have a wonderful panel discussion. When they conclude, we will save time for Q&A. Hopefully you received a note card when you came in. We ask that you write your question on the note card and raise it, and our volunteers will come by and pick it up, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those questions as possible. And now I would like to turn this over to our panel.
All right. Thank you. Hello? Oh, there we go. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you to the corporate partners, and thanks to all of you for taking time out and maybe missing a little bit of the Dallas Stars game tonight. We have plenty to talk about when we talk about securing transgender rights. They have never been more in peril than they have been in just the last several weeks and the last several months since this legislative session has been in place. I think somewhere George Orwell wondered how his work became nonfiction, because they have created something called the Child Protection Act, which doesn't protect children. It denies them access to medical care. But then when we look at what harms children, to me, you look and say, if we're going to protect them, let's look at what's harming them. The number one cause of death for 13 to 19-year-old children is what? Thank you. Everybody at once. I was asking one of our legislators recently, I said, of the 7,000 bills that have been proposed this session, are there any of them that are going to help children feel a little bit safer in school instead of having somebody bust in and shoot them? And they said, no, there's nothing addressing gunfire in that, but we are working on removing access to health care. So we'll talk about that and a whole lot more as we move along. But there is a beautiful exhibit here called Rise Up that talks about and shares the history of the LGBTQ movement. And so we kind of wanted to draw a theme tonight of looking back to find our way forward, because the LGBTQ community has a very, very rich history, and I think it certainly is well worth mentioning. So I want to start with Diamond. Beginning with Stonewall, Marsha P. Johnson, a trans woman of color, was there from the beginning. Sylvia Rivera, a key figure in that fight for equality. Yet these are by far not the only pioneers. Yet 50 years after Stonewall, the trans community still often feels left behind. Can you talk about these pioneers and also why we haven't shared equally in the progress?
Oh, wow. So Stonewall is one of those events that you really have to give context to what was going on. In the 60s, the race was super on the forefront of what was going on. The cisgender black race were really in the fight when the civil rights movement. But what was happening is the gender identity and that movement, sexual liberation movement, was also budgeting. But the difference is, as a black person, we can't hide this. So, but sometimes you can act cisgendered, you can act this kind of way to kind of hide it, and people were invested because of safety to hide it. But during Stonewall, these were people who were constantly harassed by police. They were coming to this particular club multiple times, just harassing and locking people up for rules like masquerade laws and, dressing up like this, dressing up like that. And so this was the first time that people in this club said, you know what, we are tired of this, and somebody by the name of Stormy DeValerie was being harassed, which was actually a butch lesbian, was being harassed by the police, and Marsha and Sylvia and all the people that was in there was like, we're not gonna take this, and that's when the legend of throwing the first brick or the first shot glass or whatever was thrown started, and it led to this multiple day riot. And so this is the first time we see an uprising, one of the first time, because when we think about Compton Cafeteria in San Francisco, when we think about in LA the Dewey Donuts, when we think about, there's so many uprisings like this that happened that usually centered drag queens, trans women, black people who were homeless, black queer people who were homeless. This is because they were usually bothering the people in places that were in marginalized community. And so Stonewall was just one of those things that I think because the privilege of New York became the thing that was the staple. And so, yes.
So these founders, though, these leaders, were from the black trans community.
Absolutely.
How do we get so flipped around and left behind? And why are we bringing up the rear?
Because even in our own community, we are marginalized. Even in our own community, we are seen as particularly at the time, as the crazy ones. We have had so many advancements over the past 50 years in regards to science, in regards to the medical industry, and so. But then it was in the 60s, so this was early. Benjamin was the standard. You go and you transition and be exactly like cis people. You do nothing outside of that norm. And so during that time, we was the margin of the marginal. And so it wasn't until recently when we think about gay marriage being passed in 2015, because if we think about before 2015, when we think about candidates and what we asked them to see if they were on our side, it was always, what do you stand on the gay marriage? But once that was passed, what was the next frontier? The T that had been silent for all those decades, even though we had started fighting back then in the 60s.
Yeah, we really can't afford to be fractionalized because we only represent about 0.52% of the general population, so we can't really divide the 0.52 into 0.1s and 0.1s and 0.1s, even together. We don't make a very loud noise. Trayshawn, I want to talk a little bit about some of the political things that are happening now, but we're seeing things that are echoed from the past. I grew up in California, and in 1978, there was a proposition on the ballot called Proposition 6, or it was known as the Briggs Initiative. And the Briggs Initiative would have fired every gay and lesbian teacher in the state of California. Because the fear that was being spread, they said, well, if gay and lesbian people don't reproduce, they have to recruit. And if you let them around your kids, they're going to recruit them. And so are we hearing that now, the whole groomer thing? Look, if you have a kid who's 14 years old, you probably can't get them to clean their room. You think I could be with them for an hour and make them gay? And we're not recruiting, by the way. We really aren't. So Proposition 6 was defeated with the help of a guy named Harvey Milk, who hopefully you're familiar with. So Harvey was a leader, and he said it's important to come out and be visible, because if they paint you as the monster under the bed, then they can tell whatever sort of lies they want. But if you're out and you're visible, then it's harder to make that argument. And I think that was a big contributing factor to defeating Proposition 6. So today there's fear of letting trans women participate in sports because we have such an unfair advantage, apparently. And also, I think about the ridiculous notion, because there's so many trans women that I know that are just trying to survive from one day to the next. They're not worried about playing softball. That's way far down on the list. But that said, how can we help the cisgender population not be afraid of us? Because fear is being used even now.
That's a big question, honestly. But I think a lot of it has to do with some of the portrayal that we see in media. I mean, we've seen it since the 90s, right? Like, trans people are always portrayed as like someone who is lying about their identity. Robin Williams in a dress trying to just be with his kids. It goes on for a long laundry list. The 90s was actually a really scary period for movies, by the way. But I think what it comes down to is just being visible and letting people know, like, hey, we're here, we're trans, we're normal people. We're ultimately just trying to go to work, we're trying to go to school, we're trying to provide for our families just like everybody else. But also, we need allies in there as well, right? So for a long time, kind of like what Diamond was saying about how we're portrayed as like wild or like we have these unnatural like parts of ourselves that people are just so afraid of. Like, ultimately they're getting away with this type of narrative by saying we're coming for your kids, we're coming for, you know, the safety of your family and the integrity of our institutions. And when you look back at it, it's the exact same thing that happened with black people back in the day, right? Like, they, like during Jim Crow and before Jim Crow, when they dehumanized what black people were, they were like, they're savages, they're lazy, they're, you know, ultimately coming to like harm your family, your wife, your children, whatever that looks like, and just painted all of these stereotypes of what a black person was, and to ultimately dehumanize them and shame their characters. And it's the exact same narrative that we see today, right? Like, no one wants to go into a bathroom and like harm people. Like, if anything, like, trans people make themselves really, really small when they go in the bathrooms because they just want to go pee and not be noticed and not have anyone pick at them. So like, it's just ultimately, whenever you see or hear something, speak up, like, say something like, hey, no, I know a trans person, or I am a trans person, or whatever that looks like. And ultimately, they're just normal people like everyone else.
Yeah, I remember back, you were talking about the bathroom issue. In 2015 and 2017 in our state legislature, we had our lieutenant governor. He said that trans people using the bathroom are one of the biggest issues facing Texas today.
And he almost froze us to death in 2000.
So yeah, one of the biggest issues. So that's why we needed the bathroom bill. Well, the bathroom bill didn't pass, thanks in large part to Texas Competes, which is a group of corporations that said, hey, knock it off. Discrimination isn't a Texas value. And fortunately, those things didn't pass. But in the intervening 8 years, since they didn't pass, how many times have transgender people used the bathroom over those 8 years? What, like 4, 5, 6 times a day? Times 365 times 8 times however many transgender people there are. If you took everybody in Texas and wrangled them together, they would probably be about the size of the city of Waco. So there's not a ton of us. But how many issues has there been of transgender people causing a problem in a bathroom since then? 8 years. Zero. It just doesn't happen. So was that a lie, or was that something that just went away on its own? But so it's important to understand.
We've been attacked in bathrooms, though.
Yeah, we definitely were far more likely to be a victim in a bathroom. As a side story, I remember it was the first time that I waited in line in a women's bathroom. I'd been using the bathroom for a number of years, but it was in a movie theater, and the theater lets out, and there's this huge line in there. And so I'm like some of the other girls in there are like coming up to my shoulder because I'm like 6 feet tall, and I felt like Gulliver. So I'm like slumping down. And also too, they don't tell you this, but men, if the restroom's crowded, they line up in the middle of the bathroom and they take up a lot of space. And women, they line up against the wall. So I didn't get the playbook. So I'm lining up in the middle and looking over and going, okay, I guess we're lining up over here. So I lined up over against the wall, and I realized why women do that is because, for one, it's just courteous. But the other is they only have to defend that much space. And the bathroom is a place where you're uniquely vulnerable. And so they've got the wall. It's kind of like, the sideline in the NFL is the other defender. And so you only have this room that you have to worry about. But that's not the posture of a predator. That's the posture of somebody who's scared to death and just has to use the bathroom. And so to be lied about and be portrayed as someone who is a predator or a danger, it just kind of breaks my heart. Carter, the March on Washington, and we're talking about the one back in 1987, sought equal rights and funding for AIDS, and then again with an estimated million on April 25th of 1993. Is it maybe time for another one? How do we get the attention en masse? Because I saw a survey recently that said something like 79% of Americans support transgender rights. So I feel like we have a lot of support, but we don't have very many friends. So is a march something that might do it? Or, we need to kind of put our heads together and get people's attention and say that, things are steamrolling and they're getting pretty scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a march would be helpful in that it gives visibility and it shows that there's a unified belief by a large group of people. But I think in order to really make change happen, we're going to have to do more than just march. We're going to have to take it to social media where everybody socializes. And even more so, we have to build more allies, specifically with corporations. That's where the money is, and that's what feeds politicians. So that's what feeds, in my opinion, their overall mindset and the things that they want to push out to their supporters. So if we can have more allies from corporations and funders that are believing in the work that the trans organizations are doing, or organizations that have the best interests of trans people, then that's where we're going to really see an impact and a change when it comes to talking about legislation and laws and policies that affect all trans people, including their access to employment, including their access to healthcare. We need more allies. We can march, and that does give visibility, as I stated, but at the end of, when we all settle back home, it's just that a matter of the streets are dirty and, the laws are still in place. So we have to have more action, and I think this is a great start. Being a part of this exhibit where we have allies coming to hear about the history of trans people and the future of trans people and seeing where they can fit in to offer their allyship in whatever that is. If it's offering their skill set, volunteerism, donations, talking to their employer about how can we be more inclusive, or what are we doing to support the trans community. So again, we can only be in so many places. Right now, we're just here, but there's a whole lot going on out there, and we need more allies.
Yeah, that's a great point. We need our allies more now than ever, but I think we need to understand that the term ally is a verb. It's something you do. And as I've been talking to corporate partners, I'm a little bit uneasy because I work for a nonprofit, and so we rely on corporate donations. But on the other hand, I think if you're going to support an agency, putting a pride flag on your website during the month of June and then taking it down July 1st thinking you've done the job is not good enough anymore.
Right.
So put the pride flag up there, but back it up with action, back it up with initiatives at work to where we contact elected representatives and say this kind of stuff will not stand. It's not going to happen, and it seems to be happening in the dark. People were tossed out of the chamber today in the legislature for protesting. Another was taken out for a whole year for unfurling a banner that said support trans kids. And that kind of stuff is breaking my heart. So I think we need to respectfully ask for more from our partners, right, Trey?
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to corporate donations and sponsorship, you have to be a true ally in that, right? So one thing that we notice is that corporate sponsors kind of like split the fence. So they'll give $50 million to a right-wing person, and then they'll give another 50 million to someone else, right? And that's their way of kind of playing both sides. You cannot do that because you're supporting the very hateful things that are being targeted towards the community. If you truly care about human rights, you have to back that 100%, and don't be afraid to lose whatever base is stirring that stuff up.
And also, be creative about your and expansive about your own particular power. Because yeah, we can think about donors and corporate people, and they got money. I'm broke, so I don't know. For me, that ain't my possibility. But where is my possibility to be powerful? Where do you have power? Do you have power in your church circles? Do you have power in your home? Are you allowing that space in your home? We're not having that transphobic rhetoric in my house. Where you control, are you hiring people? Yes, y'all changed the policies to be inclusive of trans people at your job, but are y'all actually hiring people to actually protect them, the policies to protect them? And so are you giving them opportunities in where you have power? Because a lot of times people think, oh, that's just somebody else needs to do it. But in your circle of people, you have the power. You have a way to make a space that is not transphobic in your circle. So that's where your allyship can show up too, if you don't have money, like me.
Yeah, you brought up a thing that you hear a lot is they want to talk about both sides of the issue. And that's great. I think that's certainly fair and reasonable in many cases. But when we're talking about things like access to health care for children, I don't think that's a two-sided issue. That's not an argument. That is something either you do or you don't do. And if you don't do, what kind of a society are you? I mean, who takes health care from children? Yeah, well, good answer. Come on up, grab a chair. Trey, I want to talk about, we moved the clock forward to 2007. Something that happened then was ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. It was great, except that it excluded the T once again. So why are we still playing catch up? I mean, even after 2007, this isn't the 1950s anymore. Or is it?
It could be. Honestly, the 2007 ENDA situation was weird all the way around, right? Like, I think trans activists went really hard after that to say, like, you specifically left us out of this. And I think for years, and even now, we've just heard from, like, specifically the white gay community. Sorry if that's your demographic. We've specifically heard from them. We'll come back and get you later. But right now, if we include you on this, they're not going to let it fly. And it's like the gay community as a whole, the LGBT community as a whole, specifically the white ones, are really comfortable in letting the marginalized go for the sake of their own stuff. That's why gay marriage happened in the first place. It's because of white gays, if we're being honest, right? And I think once they got what they needed, they were like, all right, thanks for the ride. We don't need that anymore. And it's really tough. It shows, like, it's easy within our own LGBTQ community for folks to constantly say, like, at least I'm not that, right? And it's the same thing that we see in society. Again, I'm going to bring this back to black people, right? Like, there are minorities in this country who look at black people and, like, at least I'm not them, as if they're somehow better or whatever. And it's just, it plays out throughout time and time again, and it's essentially that.
Yeah, there was I don't know if you've seen the Chris Rock concert, but he brought up that point very, very well. He said, there isn't one of you in this audience who would trade places with me, and I'm rich. And I thought that was something that really hit home hard.
We've seen that before, though, right? When we think about suffragettes, white women got the right to vote in 1920. Black women didn't get the right to vote till the 60s. And so even though they put Ida B. Wells and other black activists in the back of the line of the suffragette march, even though they were there fighting for the right of women to fight, to vote, and they still put them in the back, and they got their vote and left them behind, and then went into their racist corner. Oh, we got our right to vote.
How do we change that?
We gotta be more intersectional. I know that's like a buzzword, y'all, but it's real. We gotta be more intersectional when we're talking about these problems. We can't just have it about gender. We can't just have it about race. We have to be intersectional about what we are trying to dismantle. And if you start dismantling the problem, this has been said so by so many Black feminists in our life. There's books, there's things. If you start, even go back to Combahee River Collective, they called it simultaneity. It's all kinds of words to describe it. And so if you go to the margin, if you go to people who are the most impacted, if you go to the dark-skinned, Black, disabled women of the world, if you really focus on them and how and what is the problem that they are facing and fix them, it's going to affect in positive ways everybody above them. That's just how it works.
Yeah, during the last presidential administration, I forget who that was, but it was...
The orange Cheeto guy?
That's the one. Thank you. Yeah, they had made some changes, of course, when... This is something when I talk with police officers about. Because during that administration, they had changed the equal access rule that would allow homeless shelters to refuse access to transgender people based on their religious beliefs. And I can't imagine what religion would say, we're going to toss somebody out in the cold because of how they look. But apparently they could do that. There was also the military service ban. They hadn't passed Bostock yet, and so legal discrimination was okay as far as employment. We still don't have protections for housing, not in the state of Texas and not federally. We do in Dallas. I think it's a $500 fine if you throw somebody out because they're transgender. So when I talk to police officers, I say, if you come across a trans person who is on the street at like 1:30 in the morning, not doing anything wrong, not committing a crime, where do you take them? What do you tell them? Because they can legally be kicked out of their apartment, legally denied employment, can't join the military, can be refused medical care, and can be kicked out of a homeless shelter. How do you bootstrap yourself out of that? How do you just work a little harder? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what that answer is. And the answer I get from police time and time again is we don't know. And we need a better answer. And we need to work on that altogether. I mean, there's a lot of work still to do. Carter, when did the word woke become negative? I thought it was a positive all this time. I thought it was like, an awareness that there's oppression going on among the margins. How did that get to be a negative? What happened?
I think woke became negative when it hit mainstream. Because we as Black people, we have talked about being woke for ages. And the origin or the meaning for us to be woke is to have a consciousness of where we are in society as far as the oppressive things that we face because of the intersectionalities of race, class, and gender that we identify as Black people. So I think that once that word became mainstream primarily during 2020 when there were major racial justice uprisings, then it was perceived, it was attached to that it's somebody being disobedient to the laws that be, or someone who wants to revolutionize uprisings, and overall just a challenge to the traditional oppressive ideologies that white man is the standard of what an American is and what equality should be. And so to say that someone is woke or we're in a woke culture says that we're challenging that. And we're saying that we now know and we now see beyond just statistics and beyond talk, we've seen visibly and we've seen in action the discrimination that takes place, not just against Black people, not just against gays or trans, but all people should be equal to the privileges and the access that white men have. And so, that's why it becomes a negative connotation, because we are still living under the authority or the rule of white men.
And they seem really scared right now. Like they're needing to consolidate power and, put up barriers and walls and all that sort of stuff. Why are they so terrified?
I believe that they are terrified thinking that they'll lose power or that their privilege will be somehow negotiated if someone has that same access. Right. Or that revenge may come. And I don't believe that people are saying we want revenge. People are saying we want equality now. We want justice. We want access. We want our kids to have health care. We want jobs. We want, these are the things that people are saying in their protest. So how could that be taken negatively other than those who have the power to create that access feels that they'll then be negotiating their own power and privilege?
Yeah, truly, we just want the same thing anybody else wants, just the ability to live our best life without being inhibited. Another thing that's kind of a side thing to intersectional is generational, because different generations have different worldviews. My dad was in what was called the silent generation. He was born in 1919. But the influences of the 5 generations on progress, I really thought, and I look back at my yearbook and I talked to my friends and stuff in high school, I thought the boomer generation, and I was kind of on the tail end of that, but I thought we were going to be the ones to fix this stuff because we were the ones out protesting Vietnam. We were at Woodstock rolling around in the mud. I thought we were, going to get it right, and I don't know where we went wrong. But where are your generations, and how are they going to do it differently? I hear Gen Z is scaring people because they vote. They get out and they make their voices heard, and I think that's really important because ultimately that can change. But how about your generations, and how do you view that? Because there's this whole, we can't just look at it through the race lens, we can't look at it through the gender identity or sexual orientation lens, or through the generational lens, but it all plays in together.
I'll be happy to answer that. I believe that our generation, well, me and Diamonds, he's a little younger.
What?
Hey, now, don't leave me out here by myself. I believe that our generation is different in that, or as far as what I've seen, in that we are not looking for or seeking affirmation of our value from the outside. We are building community amongst ourselves and empowering ourselves to see the value in ourselves. Holistic wellness is a priority, especially for a lot of trans people. And now that, non-binary identity is becoming more prevalent, I believe that trans people have a gift and a freedom that definitely scares the hell out of society, because we're saying we won't conform to the traditional teachings or ways of how I should find my happiness. And so I believe that that is very different for this generation. In this past week, we had our national conference. It was our 10th anniversary, which is very outstanding for a Black trans-led organization to survive for 10 years. And we had over 500 trans people come here to Dallas, and a large part, or a pretty significant part of our attendance was parents of trans kids and those trans children. And to physically see myself at a young age free, and for them to see their self at my age prosperous and thriving, was absolutely phenomenal. And so I believe that, of course, the children are our future, but I believe that trans children prioritizing their own health and wellness and finding value in themselves, as well as coming up under trans advocates and the support of their parents or supportive parents, is what we need. And that's what's going to make a real difference, in that the fight will take on a whole new face beyond just give us what we want. It will say, we deserve this, and we're going to make this happen because we're also going to integrate ourselves into the systems that pass the laws. We're also going to integrate ourselves into the schools. We're not just going to ask you for permission and ask for your write-off on what values me or what gives me full access as a citizen.
And also, boomers are named after, baby boomers. There was a boom of babies happening. There was a boom of socioeconomic growth for the middle class. There was so many positive American dreamy type of things. I grew up in the crack epidemic. There was no American dream that I had access, didn't have me climbing up out of the trenches of the bad space of society. My mother went to prison based on the 94 crime bill, and I had to get custody of my brother and drop out of college when I was 21. I didn't have the boom of anything positive growing up. There was negativity where I come from. So
They lowered the boom.
Exactly. So
That was your boom.
in my brain, you can't trick me with the delusion. I know I am woke, and I know what the negatives are in this country, and I see it. I've lived through it. And so if you're not seeing it, then I have to check you, and we have taught our children. That's why they're more progressive. We lived through the trauma of boomer parents. We lived through these things. And so now we are passing that knowledge on to our young people, and they are voting, and they are listening. So it's only a matter of time, and that's why they are on their last breath. You know, the people who are trying to fight against us, they're on their last breath, trying everything, throwing everything to try to stick at the wall because they see us coming, period.
That's real life. I actually really like that. That's true. I like all of that, actually. There's really not too much I can add here. Like, I graduated high school in the 2008 recession. Like, that was graduation into the world. Like, welcome to all of this bullshit. That was literally it for me. And then on top of that, I think, like, there was literally no place in my life that I felt like I was gonna be able to be successful. You know what I'm saying? It was wild to me. And, you know, boomers, meanwhile, telling me, if you just don't buy that $5 cup of coffee, you'll be able to afford a mansion tomorrow. Like, okay, boomer, my house is not going to cost $5. Thank God. I actually got a bunch of student loans forgiven. Thank you, Biden, my dude.
Yeah, get your priorities straight, you know?
That's all. But I don't know. It's wild to me to even see that. I'm actually really, really grateful for Gen Z, and I'm kind of terrified for what Gen Alpha is about to do out here when they come of age, because they are going to burn it to the ground. I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm in my wheelchair like, yes, yes. Don't burn me, but yes.
Yeah, they say we all stand on the shoulders of giants. Diamond, there's a voice that has been silenced now for some time. Can you talk a little bit about Monica Roberts?
Oh, gosh. So Monica is an amazing activist that we lost in 2020, and she has changed. Her impact and her legacy is she's changed how we talk about trans people in media, how we report about trans people. We report on them with dignity and respect, and not that, you know, people don't understand how even how our murders are reported affect how we get results from them. And so her forcing us to look at how we report and how we talk about trans people in the news, her just being that voice was what changed the media on a national level, and we lost her in 2020. And so, she was a Texan, and she was a part of our Black Trans Advocacy Coalition and a part of our family, and it's a big loss, but we're gonna continue to walk in her footsteps and stand on her shoulders. And she is an ancestor now, so, you know, we can call on her when we need her.
That's all.
Yeah, she's definitely missed. I'll direct this to each of you. Transgender people are small in number, 0.5%, and largely misunderstood. What would you want the broader majority to understand about us?
That we're just people, right? Like, trans rights are human rights at the end of the day. It's nothing short of, I don't know how to even describe that. We're literally just trying to live our lives and do all the things that I feel like every human being should have access to do. At the end of the day, our founding fathers wrote like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all of these things to give people essentially the right to just exist, because they were fleeing from this really oppressive religious situation and other things. And what they wrote and what they ended up building here was something that was just as bad, if not a little bit worse, because it was under the guise that we actually had those freedoms when we don't. Long story short, trans people deserve life, liberty, happiness, all of those things.
Yeah, I was listening to Jon Stewart, and he described transgender people as just a normal human variation. And that's really all we are. I mean, I know that There's some of society that would like to just put us in one of two buckets. You're either male or female, or you're either this or that. And nature by itself is so much more kind of interesting and sloppy than that. And there's a lot of different variations. It's kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with Baskin-Robbins, but they don't have 2 ice cream flavors, they have 31. And it's kind of like that with people. We're just a different flavor of ice cream out there. We're not really a threat to anyone. Carter, what would you want to add to that?
I would add that.
Get that mic up. Can't hear you.
I would add that first, I definitely like what you said, Leslie. I mean, in summary, I can't recall who said it, but that we're all just spiritual beings having a human experience. And I believe, or I would want people to know about trans people, that we are the ones who are going to create liberation for us all. Once we are truly giving equity, everybody has it, to Diamond's point earlier. So we are the ones to liberate us as a society. That includes women's rights, reproductive rights, mental health care, access to health care, employment access. Once trans people are giving all these things, then everybody's covered. And so to support the trans movement means that you're supporting equity. If you believe in human rights, then you believe in supporting trans rights.
It is no coincidence that the same people who are trying to force a 10-year-old to have a baby by her molester is trying to stop trans people from, with supportive parents, trans youth with supportive parents, letting them make the decision. We all are trying to control the agency of our bodies. This is my body, I want to do what I want with it, and I have the choice to do it as long as I'm not harming anybody else. And so this fight that we are up against, we have to get out of our silos. Like I don't want to be at the center of reproductive justice because I'm not a birthing individual, but I don't have the potential for that. But I want to support you as an ally because we have skin in the game. We want to have the control over the agency of our body. And I want cis women and trans men and non-binary people to be able to have that right. And I want to have my rights too. And we all have skin in the game. Think about places of where you have felt shame. Usually that's probably going to be rooted in the binary, the gender binary, how you feel about your body. Because just like I'm doing these things to affirm my gender, the type of wig you choose, the type of dress you choose, everything you do to present yourself as the woman or the man or whatever you are, that's you affirming your gender. That is you doing the same exact thing that I'm doing in my way with my body, and you're doing it in your way with your body. I know transits can make it feel like this is some alien thing, but no, we are all navigating this gender binary, and you're doing yours the way you do it. I want to do mine the way I do it, and we all have the right to be able to do it. And so come out of your silos. Don't feel like we're alien. You are a part of this fight too, and that's why you're an ally.
I was at the funeral of Malaysia Booker, who was murdered in 2019, and there was a minister who was doing one of the eulogies. There was a lot of people that spoke, but his name was Will Horn, and he said something that really stuck with me, and it really applies to what you've been talking about here tonight. He said, "Prejudice rarely survives experience." I really love that, because if you are afraid of somebody, don't understand somebody, someone you've never met, and whatever it is, I think if you sit down across the table and talk to that person, you're going to find that you have a whole lot more in common than you have differences. And that's one of the things I think that maybe, and I'm just speculating here, but the pandemic had that effect of where we don't talk to each other anymore. And it used to be, my parents said, if you're in trouble, go knock on the neighbor's door. I don't know that you'd give that advice to a kid now. Good Lord, you're liable to get shot knocking on the neighbor's door. And so I think we just need to quit being so afraid. I mean, we're supposed to be the greatest country in the world, and we're acting like a bunch of terrified kids. And I think we need to kind of come out of our shells a little bit and maybe take a little bit of risk and get to know people and know who our neighbors are. Trey, the Bostock ruling in June of 2020, that anniversary is coming up, and it's hard to believe that we've only had employment rights for a little less than 3 years. I mean, seriously. But that provided employment protection based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Has it changed anything for the better, or is this another case of we get a win and then we get smacked because of it? kind of like with marriage equality?
I think in some ways it has protected folks for the best, especially since it's at a federal level, and we see what's happening on the local and state levels, where there's every day more and more bills being proposed or passed that are unconstitutional and go against rulings like that. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it actually does kind of paint a bigger target at the same time. I mean, look at Roe v. Wade, right?
Yeah.
And
The Dobbs ruling.
yeah, like all of the implications that even that case has on our community, right? Like the right to privacy and losing that. I think those things combined, and they're essentially, when I say they, the same folks that helped pass that and also helped strike down Roe v. Wade. Whew. They're essentially planning a blueprint of how to come after any and everything that they do not agree with, or anything that is going to threaten to take away their power ultimately. And I'm actually terrified that they're not too far away from doing that. And with this being so public, and with folks constantly throwing that back into their face, especially on a state and local level, I am scared that it's going to do the opposite of what we would like.
Yeah, I think I don't want to get too dense into this, but I think it's important to understand there was a concurring opinion that was written by Clarence Thomas in the Dobbs ruling. And he talked about a concept called substantive due process. And to try and simplify that, that is rights that are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution, but are conferred by court opinion. Things like marriage equality, interracial marriage, the rights to abortion, and so many others. And he announced his intent to remove those substantive due process rulings from the Supreme Court and leave us kind of back in the 1950s again. And so I think it's important to be aware of that kind of thing, because there are so much that is affected when you elect somebody who gets to nominate people that sit on the Supreme Court. Today it feels like we stand at another pivotal point in history. What have we learned from the past that we can use now? Diamond, we'll start with you.
So much. Like it's a bunch of repeating stuff that we have learned in our past. When we think about, when we think about what was happening during the AIDS epidemic, when we think about what was happening in the 70s with Betty Friedan being a housewife and mad because she, don't have these opportunities, but then ignoring what Polly Murray and other Black feminists was trying to tell her. Yeah, you still privileged, you're a housewife, and I know you feel the oppression of patriarchy, but we feel the oppression of patriarchy and race, and so can you get on board? And she still was racist. And so in that regard, and a homophobe in that regard, because she didn't want the lesbians a part of it either. And so these classic things are what we are having a problem with, and why we are not coming together, and why we are not seeing our collective skin in the game. Just like I said a few seconds ago, I feel like we have to learn from the past and learn how we are not throwing each other away, throwing people. Do not think about just your situation. Think about people who are not in the room, who don't have a voice, who are not being If you only see your type of person in this space, then there is a problem. If you are in a boardroom and it's only your type of people, or you're the only one, or you don't see a variety of people, there's a problem. Where you work, then you have to make room for the people who are not being listened to, whose voice is not being heard outside of mine. You have to do that, and that's how you move forward and include more people than just your demographic.
Carter, what would you add?
I would say something that we can learn or have learned from the past that we can use towards our future advocacy for equity would be to educate ourselves within the LGBTQ and to build stronger collaborations or even allies amongst ourselves. Because we talk about ENDA and we talk about gay marriage and any sort of progressive things that have happened for the LGBTQ still excluded the T to some point. And then even if we talk about just LGBTQ rights overall, at the back of that are the Black LGBTQ. So once somebody, affirms or confirms what their change in sexuality is or their change in gender identity is, it doesn't automatically negate any other biases that they had before they did that. If they felt a certain way about a certain class of people or a certain race of people, they brought that with them. And so that still leaves us separated within the LGBTQ. But although we're a small part of the population, as you've captured, Leslie, we're very strong people. We can make things happen. And so if we are more unified as a whole LGBTQ, and have more education of how to be, Leslie, how can you be an ally to me as a Black trans person? We're both trans, but our experiences are very different. So what you're speaking on as a trans person and your rights are very different from my trans rights as a Black trans person. So how can I build an ally in you, or how can you build an ally in me as a trans woman and I'm a trans man? So just educating ourselves within the LGBTQ and building more of a tolerance and learning how we can be better advocates as a unified group, I think is going to create stronger and faster change for us in our movement.
I actually agree with both of those. I think ultimately the main thing that I can think to take away from the past to the future is don't leave people behind, and ultimately listen to the folks who are standing up screaming and telling you what's wrong. Like, don't go around the corner and be like, hey, do you know what's going on with this topic, when there's someone in your face that is literally telling you what's going on? Believe those people, and then pick a side and do something about it, right? Don't just sit back and be like, oh, I heard those trans people are having a hard time over there. No, ask questions. What can you do to help, right?
Yeah, elevate voices and then listen. I think that's one of the most powerful things. Want to get to some questions here. I have one last one, and hopefully we can end it on somewhat of a positive note. What gives you hope? Trey, we'll start with you. You think of anything at all?
I do policy work in the state of Texas.
All right, Carter.
Oh, man. So no, ultimately the one thing that gives me hope, we kind of touched on it earlier when we were talking about the newer generation coming up, and also our community, right? This past week at BTAC has been amazing, right? We were surrounded by, 500 plus Black trans people, and it was just amazing. Everyone was... Okay, I'm going to divert for just a moment here. So if you don't know, BTAC, Black Trans Advocacy Coalition, is, Carter talked about earlier, we have a conference here in Dallas every year, right? It is the only place that I have ever seen that many people from different backgrounds and ages and gender identities and gender expressions that get together and just coexist in harmony and in a family-style function where it is truly beautiful, right? I've never in my life seen anything like it. It is the most beautiful thing in the world. It is honestly the reason why I am here right now. I came in 9.5 years ago and I experienced my first BTAC. It literally changed my life, right? I am a US veteran. I came out, I had PTSD. I was new in my transition. I was suicidal. I was feeling some type of way. I went to BTAC. I found my people that I didn't even know existed, and I felt so good. And I was just, it was amazing. I was home. Exactly. It was beautiful. Long story short, BTAC is what got me into this work, and that community of people is what has given me a bunch of hope in the past, and is what I still draw on today when I go through things like what's happening at the Capitol today and later on this week. All of that, I look back and I think about why I'm doing what I'm doing and how I am very privileged to be able to do what I'm doing because of the community around me. And ultimately, I think the greater community is what gives me that hope.
Awesome. Carter.
That gives me hope.
Yeah, how's that make you feel hearing that?
Amazing. I mean, that is the vision and the soul of what the organization is about. Of course, there's advocacy, but primarily we want. First of all, our mission is to combat violence against trans people through the value, power, and love of all people. And so to hear that the impact that we've made on this young man's life in not just giving him a support group or giving him a few resources, but giving him a community, a sense of self, a place where he can see his or have a self-reflection, and also build his leadership so that he can become a strong advocate in the areas that he has interest and he has a skill set. To build an advocate in policy, to build advocates and leaders in art, to build advocates and leaders in whatever, and them to be able to come to BTAC for that inspiration and also to be replenished from the fight. Definitely gives me hope to know that the vision that we have is working and is really making a positive change on people.
Thank you, Carter.
I echo everything, but I gotta be the pessimist. I am fearful because of the past. We're learning from the past. Every time that we have a jump in change, there is some type of massacre, there's some type of blood being shed. Every change in this country, blood was shed to have it. And so the increase of gun violence and nobody is trying to stop it scares me, especially when we gather. It scares me when I am at the governor's mansion protesting something and I see Confederate flags on pickup trucks with rifles while we're protesting. That scares me. As a Black trans woman, we have high intimate partner death rates, just like cis women, and nobody is looking at it and trying to fix it, and that scares me. But like you all said, community is the only hope that I have. And I'm not going to live in fear. I'm not going to live in isolation. You brought up COVID. One of the things that COVID was kind of the comedic part about COVID was that y'all got to see how trans people live in isolation. The medical field kind of don't know what's going on sometimes if they don't have the education. They don't know what's going on. You going out in public and there's something out there that could harm you and you don't know where it's at. That's how trans people live. And so it was like, oh, y'all are feeling what we feel. It was that kind of, it was my cynical comedy, but I was like, oh, y'all get to see. And so those type of things in my community setting up, we opened up a pantry feeding people. We did our thing in housing people. We went out and gave sanitizers and condoms and whatever to people because how can you be housed if you don't have no place to go? So we was out there helping the homeless, and so we did our thing, and that let me know that I have examples of positive masculinity. My community gives me what I need to thrive over, to give me hope to say we can do this, and we just like our ancestors fought forward and they passed us a torch, we got a torch to pass forward. So that's the hope. My community give me hope.
Yeah,
Well, one thing I just want to make sure on the issue with COVID and knowing how we live and everything, it's not contagious. Being transgender,
That part, no.
it's going to be all right.
Unconditional love is contagious.
But I want to thank all of you so much. I want to get to some questions here, but you were just phenomenal. This was the most amazing panel I've been a part of in ages. You knocked it out of the park tonight. The first one, it's not a question, just want you to feel the love and support from your cis allies here. And so we're definitely feeling it, so thank you. How can I push back on social contagion theory? I think you need to push back on everything that's BS. And we need to maybe not be quite so polite or shy about doing that. I think we need to call it is what it is. Junk science. I mean, we belong as much as anyone else does in a society. You know, we don't carve out that much space. There's not that many of us, but we deserve to participate just as much as anyone. I don't know.
And of course, we've been around. We've been around. Yeah, our numbers are small, but gender variant people have been around.
Yeah, we're not new.
And it's rooted in biology. It's not just when people, they try to act like, oh, God made you do. We're not saying God made a mistake, but we're, doing our thing. The way many gender variant people have been expressing themselves throughout centuries. And so this is not new. We're just newly being able to get a voice and you hear about us.
Yeah, we're not new and we're not confused. I mean,
No.
it's the same as like, looking through the crowd. I mean, if you're a young lady here with your hand up like that, you identify as female? Okay. What type of counseling would it take to convince you you're a dude? It'd probably be pretty rude. Be like, Guantanamo Bay. I'd have to waterboard you a little bit. Not a lot, just a little. But yeah, there is no convincing someone who identifies as male that they're female or vice versa. So I'm not confused. I disagreed with the whole sex assigned at birth thing, but I'm not confused. And I don't think anyone here on this stage or anyone in our community is confused about it. We're often portrayed that way, and that's a way to devalue who we are. But it kind of makes me sad when people misunderstand that way, so we try and go out and change that a little bit. From a middle school teacher or mom of a transgender 18-year-old, how do we get companies on board? I'm scared to fight my employer because of job security, and I'm sad that that's the case. But Trey, you want to take a shot at it?
Yeah. I honestly am hoping that Gen Z actually helps with this one as well, right? Like, as we see more and more folks joining the workforce that are identifying differently and are loud and proud about who they are, I think they're actually holding a lot of these companies accountable for their internal policies so that they can just go to work and live their life. Like, Gen Z, even some of my generation with millennials, like, we will quit a job if we don't feel like y'all is doing what y'all need to do. Like, if you're not holding up your end of the bargain, I'm out. We're not our parents' generation that stay in the same job for 15, 20 years with the expectation of maybe one day I'll get a little piece of the pie. Like, no, we out. So I honestly think just like holding people accountable for what those internal policies and things look like.
One of the most difficult things, this is just an observation, but I think it's pretty spot on, is that when we looked at the bathroom bills, we had 3,000 companies in Texas Competes jump on and fight against that because that was easy to understand. It was people saying, look, and it was a concerted effort to really remove trans people from society, because if you can't use a restroom outside your house, you can't go shopping, you can't really work, can't travel. I mean, you can only be tethered the distance that you can get back to your house to use the bathroom. So that's pretty crazy. So I think businesses were able to come out and say, this is demonstrably wrong. But I think with what's going on now with transgender health care and affirming care for juveniles is companies, by and large, do not want to stick their neck out on children's health. They may support very much the trans community and children's access to health care, but they're silent on it. They're not taking a place. And we need your voices. We honestly do. I understand there may be risk involved. Look what happened to Budweiser. When Budweiser endorses one transgender person, Kid Rock has to shoot it with a machine gun. And so people are shooting beer cans now because a transgender person got their picture on a beer can. What have we become? I mean, is the movie Idiocracy now a documentary? Good grief.
I also want to piggyback on that and feel like when we're talking about like corporations being afraid to back like trans healthcare and stuff like that, like what is the most alarming thing is this narrative of what healthcare looks like for trans children. No one is mutilating genitals on children. No one is giving children hormones.
No surgery on 8-year-olds?
There's no surgery on 8-year-olds. That is not a thing that is happening. And I think what is the most alarming part of that is like we're genuinely talking about like healthcare. We're talking about like if your child has asthma and they identify as trans, now their doctor with this SB 14 that is happening right now at the Ledge is a healthcare ban on all healthcare for trans people, and it also will take away licenses of the doctors who are practicing this healthcare. Literally, if your child has asthma and you give them an inhaler as a doctor, you can have your license your medical license revoked because that child was trans. That makes no sense. This is where we are in America. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, if you look a few years down the road, cisgender people that have kids may have a hell of a time finding a pediatrician because they moved to New Mexico, California, Oregon, Minnesota, Michigan, a state that doesn't come down on them like a ton of bricks for treating children. So they may have a hard time finding a pediatrician. So I don't know.
And this leads to down the road of contraception, because the same hormones that we take is contraception. It's the same chemical makeup. When we think about HRC, when we think about hormone replacement therapy that cisgender people use too, all of these things are incorporated. So if they are trying to lead, they already took away Roe. If they're trying to control contraception, they can come through us to control contraception for you. Do you see the connection?
It's also where many of us have lost health care, because when they closed down a Planned Parenthood, a lot of transgender people that are using that for hormone replacement therapy lose access to that and now have a hard time finding a doctor that will provide care. So yeah, it's all interconnected for sure. How can conversations with transphobic people become more fruitful? What are some de-escalation tactics that allies can be equipped with for conflict? And I think that's a great question.
So we have tons of organizations. We have our organizations. We have the Transgender Law Center. We have TENT. We have so many organizations that puts out language. We put out tons of like PDFs and follow us on social media. We put out so many things that help educate you on the issue and talk and how you should talk about these things, because they want you to go down the road of arguing, because that doesn't solve anything. And so me personally, I'm not about to go to the Klan rally to talk about race. I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to strategically talk to the liberal, Hillary Clinton voting white woman who got some power, who is on my side, but maybe she might touch my hair and do some kind of racist stuff like that. But but I know she's on my side, and I can have a productive conversation with her and get her to vote. But I'm not gonna go way over here. I'm not a reach across the aisle type of person, no, because it's a waste of time. But I am gonna talk to people on my side who may be a little bit liberal and need a little bit of education and give and talk to them about it. So that's my strategy. I don't do across the aisle. That don't work. Or that's somebody else's work other than mine. And I do want to add this. It's frustrating when we think about hope. It's really frustrating because we all know that on top of this legislation stuff, I am somebody who has to go to morgue to identify bodies. I am somebody who has to go down to the jail and get people out of jail. I am somebody that's doing social justice work on a whole other level and having to go to Austin and without sleep to testify on legislation. This is heavy on us, and we need more allies with their skin in the game. And I know sometimes there's risk, but look, that's about giving up your privilege. That's about being a real ally. Sometimes you gotta protect us and be in the shield. Sometimes that's what it is. And I'm not asking you to give up your corporate comfortable job, but whatever you can do, there's going to be some things that are discomforting. And that's a part of you dismantling the system. If you are sitting in your comfort and you're not risking anything, you're not doing the work.
You've all talked about trans people being more visible to help fight fear. But trans people are threatened by real violence when they're visible. How can we address this? Yeah, it's one of the things I get asked by corporations on March 31st to talk about Trans Day of Visibility. And I often talk about the two sides of it, because if you can be visible, that's privilege. Because there are some that, because of their visibility, their lives are taken from them. If we get too visible, then we get laws in the legislature to try and take that visibility away and to drive us back inside. So yeah, it's definitely two-sided, and it's something that, like Diamond said so well, is you're not going to live your life in fear. I'm not either. I've never felt, and I'm honest, I've never felt less safe leaving my house than I do now. But I refuse to live my life in fear. I'm going to keep leaving. But I'm very much aware that we're kind of on the target list right now, and it's a little scary.
That's real. And I also think like that visibility doesn't necessarily have to come from trans people specifically. I know there's a big conversation about like being stealth and being out invisible, right? So for those who don't know, someone who is stealth as a trans person means that they just kind of go about their life, they keep their head down, they don't tell people that they are trans. And so there's this kind of a divide within the community of people who think that everyone should be out and proud and telling the world about who they are as a person. I'm not stealth, but at the same time, when I go to the gym, I don't make announcements in the locker room of who I am and what's in my pants and what isn't, right? Like that is ridiculous. But as allies, as people who are not a part of that vulnerable population who could get murdered just for being who they are, it is absolutely necessary for everyone to be standing up and being visible and loud about trans people and trans issues. Whenever something comes up, definitely make it, like if someone is making like a weird statement or some sort of misinformation about who a trans person is, or some weird stereotype comes up, someone tells a very inappropriate joke from the 90s. I'm not gonna get over that. TV was wild in the 90s. Oh my God.
Jerry Springer.
Yes.
Rest in a little bit of peace.
If you see something, say something.
You are not the father.
It's a man, Maury.
Wow.
I think also tangible survival mechanisms is important. That is what we need moving past visibility. I loved Pose. I love the shows. I love all the entertaining things and trans people winning Emmys and all that kind of stuff. I love it. It's progression. But people on the ground who are homeless, who are dealing with these things directly, we actually have to have tangible survival mechanism for them to be able to survive, make sure we have places for them to stay, things for them to eat, access to job, access to healthcare. Those are the tangible feelings. Those are the tangible tools that we need for us to actually survive in the current climate. And so if we don't have them, the visibility is just a show. That's it. Yeah. It's a bright spotlight. Like, oh, you can see me look pretty, but if I don't have things that actually help people, then I'm gonna go out when the spotlight goes off, and I go off the stage and I go home. I don't have my rent money, or I don't have a rent to pay because I don't have no place to stay, or I can't get health care. I can't get anything. So yeah, we got to have those tangible survival mechanisms.
Ultimately, long term, visibility is important because I mentioned earlier, we can be portrayed as whatever. If you've never met somebody who's transgender, some guy in Lufkin, driving a tractor, he, probably is going to have a hard time understanding the concept of trans people, let alone non-binary people. But it's like when you were a kid, if you were scared that there was a monster under the bed, the surest way to make the monster go away is for Dad to come in and shine a flashlight on it. Say, oh, it's just your teddy bear. So pull it out, everything's cool, and you sleep well. And to me, visibility is that flashlight on trans people to say, look, we're not recruiting, we're not out to hurt your kids, we're not grooming, we're not doing a lot of things. We're just trying to live our life like anyone else and get by in this existence. And when we get cut, we bleed just like anybody else. I'm a parent of 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren, and I love them like anyone else. Sometimes parents ask me, or you hear there's one of the laws that they have that is going to remove the ability to teach about gender identity and sexual orientation, things like that in school, all the way through 12th grade. So we're going to have kids graduating 12th grade before they get to learn about us, which is going to be kind of weird. Oh, look, a gay person. What's that? So yeah, it's I don't understand the fuss over that. They barely
was doing that anyway. They barely was teaching about us in school. I didn't learn about a trans person until I was a freshman in college. Or Jerry Springer was teaching. Yeah. So, yeah, it's like, they barely was teaching.
Let's see. Do you have this? would be the last one here. Do you have recommendations for resources to help educate myself and others about trans rights and issues? Talk to trans people, for one, maybe. You can read a book. There's lots of interesting ones out there. The one that I just read recently is called Mad Honey, which I would really recommend. It's a great book. And it's not about being transgender, but there's a transgender character in it that's written by a transgender author. If you're familiar with Jodi Picoult, who's an amazing author, but she wrote it along with Jennifer Finney Boylan, who is a trans woman and a professor at Columbia University. And they alternated chapters as they wrote this book, and it's just phenomenal. I ended up in tears at the end of it, but it's a great book. But there's organizations like PFLAG, which is great for parents that are worried about their kids. PFLAG is parents of other kids that are gay or lesbian or trans or non-binary, and they've been there, done that, and they can kind of calm you down and realize that it's not the end of the world, and to just love your kids unconditionally, no matter what. And if they say, oh, well, it's just a phase, okay, maybe, but you'll have no regrets if you just offer unconditional love no matter what. Because if it's not a phase, then you won't have regrets. But there's lots of resources that are out there. I'm sure you have some that you would like to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of organizations in Texas specifically that you can look into. I think BTAC, BTMI, BTWI, TENT, obviously Transgender Education Network of Texas. There's ACLU of Texas, which does a lot of different work, but they have a lot of really good resources for trans folks. Lambda Legal, Equality Texas. Yeah, there are a ton of organizations, and actually there's one for Texas Trans Kids, texastranskids.org, that is put together with ACLU, Lambda Legal, and TENT collectively. I think that one is a pretty cool resource as well. But I mean, there is not a shortage of resources, but I will say, with huge warning, because of who I am, please do your research on some of the larger name organizations that you look to for answers, because some of these organizations can be really predatory to localized communities, right? BTAC and BTMI, BTWI being the most marginalized of the marginalized doing trans work in Texas, specifically for Black trans people and kids. Like, it is really tough to see some of the larger name organizations kind of come through and Bigfoot things as if they know everything. But at the end of the day, they're still reaching into our community to make themselves look better. So just a warning, be careful with some of the organizations in which you do research on and what they do. And like Diamond was saying, like if the work that they are putting out doesn't look diverse, if you're looking at a panel that they're putting on and you're like, where are all the people who don't necessarily look like me, or why are there 4 white men talking about abortion rights, right? Like, do that sort of research, and it really does make all the difference to the community of folks that are doing the work on the ground.
I remember recently at the Trans Visibility Day, that's March 31st, I was hired to do a keynote at a energy place based in Texas, and I was asked to be the keynote, to be the trans token, but I also was asked not to talk about the right. Oh, can you not talk about the political stuff? Well, what the hell am I here for? What am I here for to talk about? What? I mean, it was really, really crazy for me to, and I made it work because I was making a jab at them while I was doing my talk. Like, I was referencing Voldemort. They who should not be named. And it worked because it was funny, but they literally were making that kind of, putting me in that position where I couldn't talk freely, but while at the same time using me to prop themselves up as an ally. Inclusive ally. So, yeah, that's what we have to deal with.
Yeah, when people say, well, I don't want to talk about politics, like, well, that's great for you, but we can't live one day of our lives without politics interfering with something we're doing. Carter, to wrap up, anything else?
Yeah, I'd say that definitely trans-led organizations would be a great resource. But I'd also like to challenge the audience to look into what your everyday life is doing for trans inclusion. Ask your job, what are our policies? How many trans employees or out trans employees do we have to actually support that? You know, your local grocer that you go to all the time, are you supportive of LGBT rights, or what are you doing? You know, because where we spend our money and our time is where the biggest impact is. We can talk, we can comment, we can like, we can do all these things, but until we take action where capitalism rules. So until we take action there, I feel that the challenges will remain. Until we challenge the actual systems, the challenges for us will remain.
Thank you so much. You guys are absolutely phenomenal tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie.
Diamond, Carter, Trayshawn, Leslie, thank you so much for your honesty. Thank you for your work. I think you've got a room full of allies here, and hopefully we're all going to go out and do our part. I did want to put in a plug for the training that Leslie does, LGBTQIA+ cultural competency. It's like a 90-minute session that Leslie did for our staff, and it was really incredible, and we all learned so much. We all need to learn and be more competent. So thank you for that work, Leslie. We are keeping the exhibit, the Rise Up exhibit, open until 9. So if you haven't had a chance to go through it, enjoy yourselves, and thank you all so much for being here this evening.